Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Busa Writing God King podcast. I am your host, Adam Mataway.
And I'm Chris, aka Dante.
Also a host. I'm
I'm
sorry that I wasn't here in last week's episode. I was not in shape. But regardless, I'm here now. And today, Chris and I are going to be presenting a very special episode, a Weeb-tastic Spectaculon. Here, we're going to be going over kind of like a recap of what we've been doing so far, all the steps we've gone over, and all the words we've shared. We're going to be specifically going over the next step, the 10th step, which is watch One Piece. Now, for those of you who do not know or have never heard of it, One Piece is a very long-running anime, which is a cartoon show from Japan, about a character named Luffy, Monkey D. Luffy, who is setting sail on the seas to become the Pirate King.
So the reason that this is in the steps to be a Busa Writing God King and why I consider it a very important addition to the path is because a lot of the tenets or steps of becoming a Busa Writing God King are highlighted in this show. Like the characters in this show highlight the importance of a lot of these steps. And even though it's a fantasy universe, it's obviously not real, it doesn't change the importance of understanding how certain scenarios could make these different steps important, and that if you follow them, you'll make progress towards your goals.
A way I like to think about it is this show, although fantasy, was made by humans. You know, the development of the characters and the things, the trials they undergo are, they're not real, but they have real impact. You get to understand these characters after years and years of change, and you get to witness the trials and tribulations they go through. So regarding that, we have decided to utilize One Piece to kind of highlight the steps we've gone over so far.
So we've taken some quotes from Luffy and from Zoro. Luffy is the captain of the ship and the main character of the show, and Zoro is the first mate and the first crewmate that Luffy adds to his team. They're two of the most important characters in the show, and they're two of the characters which are very impactful. Like, they affect and influence the characters around them incredibly heavily, and a lot of the time, any scene that involves them, not every scene, but there are certain scenes that involve them that, I'll rewatch it and it like sends chills straight through my body from how emotionally heavy the scene is. So we decided to choose quotes from those two characters.
And to start it off, of course, we're going to be starting at the first step, the original step: have a positive mentality. Of course, we don't really need to go over them. You guys can just go back and listen to the podcast. And besides, the title kind of speaks for itself. But Luffy, the character Luffy, is almost a perfect portrayal of this quote. Whenever you see Luffy, he's always smiling and laughing and giggling like an idiot. He's never hating on people. He's never being rude or crude, or, well, sometimes crude, but he's never down.
He's also never malicious, which is important to note.
But we'll go over that in step 8. And to kind of one of his quotes that speaks to me about being positive is when he talks about power. He said, Luffy quotes, "Power isn't determined by your size, but the size of your heart and dreams." And Luffy's saying, you don't need to be physically strong to be powerful. You just need to have a big heart and big dreams. You just need to stay positive and push towards your dreams. And that's where power comes from.
Yeah, I think that's very important for sure. That it speaks a lot about ambition, and also on the way that you view the world. So as long as you're willing to still, because I think if you have no dreams like at all, or all your prior childhood dreams or teenage dreams have been crushed by other people or your own insecurities or your own negative mentality, I feel like your outlook on life isn't very hopeful and it's not very bright. And Luffy here, points out that as long as you have a big heart and you have very large ambitious dreams, you're going to be powerful, and you're also going to have a more bright outlook on your future. So that's kind of important. Now, Zoro also has a quote related to having a positive mentality, where he says, "Only those who have suffered long can see the light within the shadows." Now,
That's a bit of a dark one.
yeah, that might not seem like it attaches to having a positive mentality, but it kind of does. So what he's pointing out, because Zoro, I mean, you find this out on like episode, I don't know, 20 or like 18. In his past, a dear friend of his died, and he went through a lot of shit. So, but from that point forward, he had a very positive outlook on life. He's not very negative about things. He has a dream, which is to be the world's greatest swordsman, and he knows he will reach that dream or he will die trying to reach that dream. And to him, that's a positive outlook. Like he feels confident that he will make it given the right amount of time.
Right.
So,
Like for him, his mentality is to never give up on this dream. He knows that he can only attain this dream. And that's his mentality. That's why he can maintain a positive mentality, is because, he may have suffered, but because of that, he can see the silver lining.
um, so for step two, we don't have any quotes, but
Oh,
it's
let's just
still
skip it.
relevant.
Let's just
No,
skip
it's,
it.
it's still relevant. Step two, have a mental role model, because you can actually use Zoro or Luffy as your mental role model. Um, Once you watch the show, you'll get an understanding of how their character is. And if you're able to take Luffy's positive, bright outlook on life and Zoro's like hard discipline mentality and combine them and take them for your own, you'll persevere.
And moving on to step three, work to continually better yourself as a human being. Actually, let me redo that. I kind of stuttered there. And after that comes step three, work to continually better yourself as a human being. I mean, this is pretty portrayed in the show, almost framed perfectly, because the show is almost like a collage of their progress, becoming stronger and better and learning lessons and becoming wiser. And by there, I mean Luffy and Zoro. And a good quote from Luffy is, "No matter how hard or impossible it is, never lose sight of your goal." Luffy saying, "Don't stop. Don't stop moving forward. Always try to become greater than you are now, and never give up, no matter how hard it becomes."
Similarly, um, Zoro actually has a quote that he says, "If I die here, I'm just a man that would make it this far." Basically, he tries his hardest to become the world's greatest swordsman. He always takes the path of most resistance instead of the path of least resistance. He'll purposely, instead of asking for help from the fellow crewmates to fight someone, if the other person's a swordsman, he'll purposefully put himself in a situation where he has to fight them one on one, because he wants to be able to beat every single swordsman he comes across in a one on one battle, no matter how strong they are. In fact, in the 20th episode of the anime, he fights against the world's greatest swordsman. Um, like he challenges him to a duel. He had no reason to challenge him to a duel. He just the guy happened to be passing by, and Zoro's like, "Hey man, you've got some free time, right?" And the world's greatest swordsman like, "I mean, I guess." And then Zoro's like, I challenge you to a duel." And then they fight, they duke it out, and he has no reason or business putting his life on the line at that point in the anime because he's not particularly strong enough to go against them. But he does it anyway because he he sees it as the shortest path, even though it's super ultra high risk. He sees it as the shortest path to getting to his goal, which is just to beat the world's greatest swordsman. Then he becomes the world's greatest swordsman.
I mean,
And
of
so he
course,
constantly puts
that's
himself
an
into difficult
extreme.
situations.
That is an extreme, but the idea is, no matter what obstacles are in your way, go for it. Continue, like, push yourself to work harder to better yourself.
Yeah. So going on to step 4, break out of your mental prisons. This is a quote by Zoro. In a real fight, there is no man or woman. If you don't fight with your real power, that's the most shameful thing. And it's important because not that I'm condoning that you guys go and just start fucking fist fighting women out of the blue, but it's important to note that in when he says real fight, it's kind of to the death, right? Because they live in this fantasy world, and that's just the kind of universe that they live in. But there are certain areas of life where that can be applicable, like if you're in the office and you have a very competitive business place and you're trying to make the most sales, right? It's like you're not necessarily going to hold back um, if some of your coworkers are female and there's some sort of competition between you two. It's not really smart for your own path and for their own development for you to really hold back. You should really just go with it, go towards it with all your might, and not be so worried about the implications or some sort of very specific nuanced situation, like the fact that they're female and you're male. That's just kind of, my opinion, that's pretty sexist. And in this quote, Zoro's indicating that, you should always be trying your best, regardless of the situation, right? An example I can think of that applied to me quite a long time ago was, it's kind of a fucked up situation, but let's say you play basketball against a 6-year-old child, right? Like the 6-year-old child just walks up to you out of the blue. Maybe you're at a family gathering. It's like your little cousin or something. And he comes up to you and is like, play basketball with me, right? You have two choices here. One is to let him win, right? It's kind of an impossible battle because if you just fucking like tank him, right? And you score like 100 points on him and he scores 0 points because you're actually playing your best, a lot of people are going to see you as an asshole, right? But if you hold back and you let him win, right? Okay, a lot of people are going to see you as a weak bitch, right? Some people are going to see you, oh, he was so kind, like he let the kid win, whatever. But some people are not going to see that you did that on purpose and are going to think you're a weak bitch. Now, from the little kid's perspective, there's a couple different ways that can be taken. Is if you let him win, right, by holding back, he might get overconfident in his abilities and get cocky and might not even, because he's 6 years old, so he might not be able to perceive, oh, he let me win out of kindness. He might actually think he beat you, right? And in fact, a lot of 6-year-olds get really cocky, really annoying, and kind of like bully-esque when they have that level of confidence instilled in them. Now, I'm not saying you should crush them entirely, right? But it's important to instill a sense of rivalry and competition, right? So
What a weird lesson to come out of this.
yeah, I know, right? So
How to train your child.
yeah,
Chris.
try
Get his new books,
to try to instill a healthy sense of rivalry in the kid, right? So okay, maybe don't go, at your absolute maximum because you'll just crush the kid completely, right? But make it close, and make it fun, make it engaging. If you make it too easy, you know, the kid might enjoy it a little bit, but then he's not really going to get much out of it and he's not going to progress himself. And you're not going to progress either, right? So, one thing that I try to do is if I play like there's this game Smash Bros Ultimate. If I play that against a less experienced player than me that I can easily win if I try my hardest, I try to practice moves that I don't practice when I'm trying seriously, like spikes when you run off the stage and hit someone in the air
Hold
off
on,
the
hold on,
stage.
hold
Right?
on. We're going off a pretty deep hole here.
I know, but it's important to explain the point that I'm trying to make.
Well, then try to make the point in 1 point instead of 3. I just want to keep it short. Like not the whole lesson, but I want to keep it like as direct as possible to the 5 words or the 6 words. Break out of your mental prisons. Because in, like, for instance, with the child,
No,
when you were talking about beating the child, you never once talked about how it directly correlates.
Okay, so cut that out and let me step back. I got a better.
Yeah, I want you to just like package it in one and then go.
I'm gonna package it into as a male competing against a female. That's how I'm gonna package it.
Oh, that's perfect because that's correlated to the quote.
All right, so
you want to redo the whole thing? Just start from break out of your mental prisons.
Sure. All right, so in step 4, break out of your mental prisons. There's a quote by Zoro that's applicable, and he says, "In a real fight, there is no man or woman. If you don't fight with your real power, that's the most shameful thing." So, what's important here, and an example in real life that I can give is, if you're a male competing with a female, I really don't care in what setting, but let's do it in the example of, I don't know, one-on-one in basketball or something, right? Let's say a girl challenges you to a 1v1.
And this is assuming you're a man.
Yeah, this is assuming you're a man. Assuming you're a man, a girl challenges you to a 1v1. You should play to your best capacity, because even if you entirely crush the girl and she doesn't even score a single point, it's going to be the road for your improvement and for her improvement if you try your best. If you half-ass, right, then you're not going to improve whatsoever. She might improve somewhat because maybe your half-assing is still enough of a competition for her to improve her game, but you're not going to improve. But if you try your best, right, it's going to instill a sense of competitive drive in your opponent, and they're going to try to beat you harder and harder, right? Some people don't. Some people just lose the will. It's like,
Well,
it's 20-0, they lose the will. But
this is also only if both of you enjoy basketball, like want to be better at basketball. If you're just doing this as some fun date thing, then this is a different scenario.
Correct. This is if basketball is in line with your ambitions or something that you want to get better at. Of course, I don't mean like as a random hobby. Like if you've never played ping pong and someone challenges you a ping pong game, like, just have fun with it. Who really cares? But in the case that it's something you want to actually get better at, or even if you don't, let's say like you're done with basketball, it was just a hobby, but your opponent, you can see your opponent is competitive and wants to get better at it, you should still play your best as kind of a respect thing for your opponent, regardless of if they're male or female, or taller than you or shorter than you or heavier than you or lighter than you. None of that shit matters. Just play your absolute best, and don't change what you're doing based on your opponent. You should always be trying your best if you want to better yourself as a human being. And to do that, you need to break out of your mental prisons. You need to break out of the idea like, oh, I'm a 6'5" dude playing against a 5'2" girl. I should really be gentle, and I should let her win, for her ego. Or no. Just go at it, right? If you actually respect her, you should really play your best, because that's especially in sportsmanship, that's good sportsmanship to.
Right. I mean, Sora says it best. If you don't fight with your real power, that will be the most shameful thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Don't let things stop you. Don't let your mental conceptions stop you. A bit of a different turn, but we're on to step 5, which is live by your word. A good, solid quote from Luffy, and you hear it quite a bit, is I've set myself to become the king of pirates, and if I die trying, then at least I tried. Luffy's saying, I will become the king of the pirates, and he's willing to die to attempt to become the king of the pirates. He will go to all feasible means to fulfill the promise that he's made, not only to others, but to himself.
It's important to note that Luffy always says, I'm going to be king of the pirates to everybody he comes across and to his crewmates when he meets them.
Literally every person he meets knows that he is trying to become the king of the pirates.
And to give you an idea, in the beginning of the anime, he is nowhere near the power level required to even come close to attempt that. But he says it anyway because he's determined. And through his determination and through all the hardships he faces, he continually gains more and more power. And he starts making an impact on people because what he's saying, he's living by it. He says, I'm going to be king of the pirates. And he does the most belligerent, stupid, risky, crazy, dangerous bullshit in order to get there, right? Like, he'll fight an opponent that's twice as strong as him. And out of sheer persistence, stamina, and absolute willpower, and some cunning fighting strategies, he can overpower them and show people, like, I'm not afraid. If I die in this fight, well, fuck it, I die. But if this is my way to becoming king of the pirates, I'm fucking tanking through this motherfucker.
A way to think about it is, to become the king of the pirates, you need to be the strongest of them all. And the only way to be the strongest of them all is to, be stronger than everyone you meet. And Zoro, speaking of strong, also has a pretty relevant quote here.
Yeah. He says, if I were to take even one step back, I believe that all those important oaths, promises, and other deals until now would all go to waste, and I'll never be able to return before you ever again. Now, he says this when he fights against the world's greatest swordsman. And the world's greatest swordsman, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1, the world's greatest swordsman has stabbed him pretty much in the heart, like a little bit before, because it's a very shallow blade. And the world's greatest swordsman says, do you want this to go through your heart? If you don't step back, right? If you step forward, it's going to go through your heart. And then that's when Zoro drops this quote. And out of respect for him, the world's greatest swordsman pulls the dagger back. And then
wait, hold up. I've got an idea.
What's up?
Let's redo this part of Zoro right here. And this time you just say, you give context. You say, okay, moving, imagine what I was saying at the end of the Luffy quote where we were talking about power. And then you start describing the scenario, then give the quote. Because the way you said it just now is perfect. You were like, and then he drops the quote. But instead, I wished you quoted the quote. He's got a sword in his heart, and if he takes a step back, he'll die.
Okay, I got it.
All right, the only way to live is to take a step back.
Okay, so, I don't know, put a little note for Craig. And
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, so for about the next minute and 30 seconds, spoiler alert, I'm going to describe a scenario from One Piece from about episode 24. Zoro is fighting the world's greatest swordsman, and he has a dagger stabbed into his chest. And the world's greatest swordsman says, what's wrong with you? Do you want this to go through your heart? Like, do you want to die? And Zoro's like, no, I don't. And the world's greatest swordsman says, if you take a step forward, right? If you don't take a step back right now, you will die. And Zoro says, if I were to take even one step back, I believe that all those important oaths, promises, and other deals until now would all go to waste, and I'd never be able to return before you ever again. And out of respect for him, the world's greatest swordsman pulls the dagger out of his chest and then brings out his massive sword and then gives him a big slash across the chest, but lets him live. Like it's a massive wound, and he should have died, but he could have chopped him in half, and he decided to pull back a little bit out of respect, and he says, "It's not your time to die yet, young one." And then Zoro falls into the water, and that's that. But the importance of this is that Zoro understands that if out of the fear of death, out of the fear of losing his life in that moment, that if he steps back, he's going against everything that he said before that. To every person that he said, "I'm going to be the world's greatest swordsman," every oath that he made to himself, to his loved ones, to all the people amongst his path, he realized, if I shy away from this here, then I'll never get back here again. Because only somebody with the determination to die for this cause will make it to be the world's greatest swordsman. And that's when he drops that quote.
We have a bit of a predicament, which is both of these people are living for what they're talking about. Luffy is living to become the king of the pirates, and Zoro is living to become the world's greatest swordsman. So for them, it's almost second nature to make these choices. In fact, it is, their instincts that make these choices for them. But that's also an important lesson to learn in of itself. If you want to achieve something, you have to live that.
Exactly.
If you want to become the greatest chess player, you have to live and breathe chess.
Yes, and it is very vital to understand that the more you're willing to gamble, the more you're willing to sacrifice towards an ambition or a goal or some oath or promise that you set for yourself, the more likely you're willing to achieve that you will achieve it. And if you want that percentage chance to be as close to 100 as possible, be willing to give your life for it, right? I can give you a very simple example. If I say, I guarantee that tomorrow I will be up at exactly 6 a.m., right?
Oh God, you've just fucked yourself.
Yeah, but it's whatever. If I'm willing to die to be up at 6 a.m., right? If I consider it like, oh, if I'm not up at 6 a.m. tomorrow, I will literally die. Like if 6:01 rolls around and I'm not awake, I will die. Watch the amount of drive and like the spur in my step. Well, I guess the spur in my half-ass roll out of bed.
Out of your bed.
Yeah, the jump out of my bed is going to be magnified because it's that important, right? And that's something that you have to understand is, although, yeah, okay, none of our lives are at risk because we live in like the most comfortable, safe, as long as you live in the U.S., the most comfortable. Well,
yeah, hold on. Let's stop. Let's move on to the next one now. I think that was a good ending.
Okay.
All right, you wanna? I guess I can do this. I'm just reading the quotes. And on the next step, we have zero dependencies. Oh, I'm going to redo that. And this brings us to step 6. Have zero dependencies in life. Luffy quotes, "I don't want to conquer anything. I just think the guy with the most freedom in this whole ocean is the Pirate King." Luffy doesn't want necessarily to become the Pirate King. It just so happens that being the Pirate King means he is the most free man on the earth. And that is his goal. Luffy wants to be as free as possible. He wants to have nothing holding him back, chaining him down, weighing on him. Luffy wants to have zero dependencies. He just wants to live life to its fullest.
It's kind of funny because everybody freaks out whenever he says he's going to become king of the pirates, because it's this lofty ambition and there's no way you can do it. It's impossible, all this kind of shit. And it's funny.
It's like walking around and saying, I want to become the president.
Yes, but you only want to become the president because you want to sit in the Oval Office. Like your real goal is, I want to sit in the Oval Office. And so even though you could probably manage that somehow, some other way, you're like, fuck that, I'm just going to become president. And then you just become president because you want to sit in the Oval Office. It's like the actual goal itself isn't to become king of the pirates in Luffy's case. It's just because he wants to be the most free. And a way to guarantee that he's the most free is to become king of the pirates. So even though that might not be the easiest solution, he might have some other way to become free. He chooses that route because he'll be the most free.
And Zoro, of course, being a travel companion of Luffy, has very similar mentalities to him. So Zoro likes, but of course he's a little more violent. He is a swordsman, and Zoro says, "When the world shoves you around, you just got to stand up and shove back. It's not like somebody's going to save you if you start babbling excuses." This is a kind of an inverse of the Luffy quote, because this is saying, "Depend on yourself." He's saying the only thing you should do when you're facing adversity is to stand up and shove back. You yourself can't make excuses, because you can't rely on other people to save you when you're making them.
Yeah, it's very important to realize that in this life, as unfortunate as it is, nobody's gonna do shit for you. Nobody's gonna come rescue you. There's no fucking white knight in shining armor riding a fucking horse that's gonna come along and whisk you away to this magical land of no responsibilities or obligations. I mean, that's not entirely true. There's some very rare cases that's gonna happen, but 99.9% of people are not going to have that happen to them. Nobody's just going to come along and fix your entire life in one day just because, I don't know, they're sorry for you or
Because
something.
you got lucky.
Right? Yeah, exactly, right? So you have to realize that you are in control of your own universe and your own life. The choices you make on a day-to-day basis are what are going to shape your future, not whatever excuses you want to make up, not, oh, but I got a flat tire, so I couldn't make it to the gym today. Bullshit, all right? That's an excuse, right? And now, whatever progress you were making towards your physical goals is delayed because you decided to let life push that out of your way. Instead of being like, you know what, I don't give a fuck. I'll run to the gym or I'll take an Uber to the gym. There's so many ways around a problem. You have to realize that you are in control of that. If you really want to get something done, get it done, because that is what will change your life, and that's what will make you reach your goals.
Beautifully said. All right, I got an idea real quick.
Cocaine. I agree completely.
So this is kind of like an ultra meta idea, but what if you and I wrote like a chat like this? And then here we can type to the person that's speaking. So we can say, like, let's say you have a word that's perfect in the sentence and you want me to say it, you can just type it there and I'll like read that and realize what you're saying.
I mean, sure.
I think that would be like a fun meta thing, because it would also help you and I, as like, this would be also like a training exercise for our like, we're essentially like live critiquing each other. What
You know what the first thing that come to mind was?
what
To just write the N-word mid-sentence. See if you could maintain your composure halfway through the sentence.
I literally expect that. So
all right, so we're on 7.
Yeah. And now we move on to number 7. Step 7, set your goals as high as you possibly can. I mean, this is we've already gone over this for essentially, Zoro wants to become the greatest possible swordsman. He needs to be, as ambitious as possible and try to. Oh, that just fucked me up. let me just redo that whole entire thing. Now we're on step 7. Set your goals as high as you possibly can. And I'm not going to lie, we've already gone over this. Luffy's trying to become the king of the pirates, the number 1 pirate in the entire pirate world. And Zoro, meanwhile, is also trying to become the greatest swordsman in the pirate world. But we do have some quotes for them. Luffy says, "The world's greatest swordsman. That's great. And it's fitting, since your new boss is going to become the king of the pirates. Anything else would make me look bad." Of course, here's Luffy talking to Zoro when he first meets him, and Zoro tells him that he's going to become the world's greatest swordsman. And Luffy's saying, "Wow, that's great. I'm going to become the king of the pirates. We're a perfect pair."
I think that's pretty fantastic because, Zoro is saying it in a very serious manner and trying to indicate to Luffy, like, hey, I'm not just your ordinary motherfucker, right? And Luffy, without even missing a beat, just says that quote that, Adam just read. Without missing a beat, just says it nonchalantly, right? And, Zoro kind of reacts to it a little bit, and then he gets kind of excited, and then he joins Luffy's crew.
Do you want to redo this step? Because I feel like with you can do the same thing we did last time when just introduce the scene.
No, we're chilling. I like it.
All
right. All right, so Zoro has a quote as well related to this where he says, to be the best, you need to accept the fact that
hold on. I did the same thing, and I don't want us to do that, which is us saying, like, all right, and here's a quote by Zoro, here's a quote by Luffy,
Yeah, fair.
That's why I wanted you to redo it, because I felt terrible about how I introduced that quote.
Okay, I mean, fuck it, I'll redo it. Let's go.
Yeah, because I like how you do it, where you talk about a scene.
I got it.
But then you just say, and then he drops that quote that Adam just says, and I'm like, no, say the quote.
All right, I got it. All right, so step 7 is set your goals as high as you possibly can. Now, there's a very impactful scene in One Piece very early on when Luffy's first meeting Zoro. Zoro's kind of tied up on this crucifix, and he's gonna die. And Luffy says, "I'll untie you and help you escape if you become my crewmate." And Zoro's like, "No, I'm not gonna become a pirate. Like, I have greater ambitions than that." Blah blah blah. And then he's about to die. Like, they're literally about to shoot him, and Luffy's like, "Come on, man! Like, I'll untie you." And he's like, "All right, you're the son of the devil, but fine. If that's what it takes, I'll become a pirate." And then Luffy unties him. There's this whole battle sequence, and then Zoro at one point indicates to Luffy that, like, okay, now I'm your crewmate. I'm gonna join your ship, but there's something important that you need to know. And he says, "I'm gonna be the world's greatest swordsman." And he says it sort of intending to, like, make a big impact on Luffy, and he's expecting Luffy to kind of react. And instead of reacting like, "Oh wow," like, "Whoa, like, who are you," kind of thing, Luffy just nonchalantly says, "The world's greatest swordsman? That's fucking awesome. And it's fitting since your new boss is going to be king of the pirates. Anything else would make me look bad." So he's essentially indicating that, sweet, they're a perfect pair, because Luffy's ambition is just as high as Zoro's ambition. It's a different path. Zoro wants to be the greatest swordsman. Luffy wants to be the king of the pirates, right? So they have similar ambitions, but and they're just trying to reach the top of their own paths, right? So that they both are setting their goals as high as possible. There's nothing higher for Zoro than the world's greatest swordsman, and there's nothing higher than Luffy as a pirate than being the king of the fucking pirates, right? So they both set their goals really high, which is crucial. And yeah, then they become crewmates, and they just set sail and start journeying to fulfill those ambitions.
Yeah, journeying to fun. And frankly, it's easy enough to say one thing and do the other, but a lot of the previous steps help out with that. Break out of your mental prisons and live by your word. That kind of helps you. If you can live like that, then it'll help you get to where you want to be. But another thing to keep in mind is that you are never the best. You will. In fact, I remember learning this early on. There will always be someone better than you. So you just have to have the will to strive to be better than all of them. No matter what's in your way, you got to strive for that. And Zoro has an amazing quote for this. He says, "To the best." Let me redo that whole thing. Zoro says, "To be the best, you need to accept the fact that you're not the best, and have all the will to strive to be better than anyone you face."
Side note about this: Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson actually had a speech where he indicated that he started getting up at 4 in the morning every morning because he decided to have the mentality, I'm gonna outwork every motherfucker out there. So he started waking up at 4 in the morning because it gave him extra hours in the morning to do so much more than most people do in their entire day. By the time 8 a.m. rolled around, he had already done 2 workouts and had his breakfast, and he was already starting to work on something else, you know? So it's important to realize that to reach these insanely high goals, you need to have as much drive as possible, and you need to strive to surpass everybody that you encounter, right? You encounter someone that has more experience with them, use them as a tool, learn from them, and then surpass them. And then just keep doing that every time that you meet someone that's at a higher position than you are.
And this also really goes back to what we were saying about live your goal. Is when you are living the life that is your goal, you will always encounter people who are better than you. And that this mentality is so important that you have to accept that you're not always going to be the best, but you just have to try to be the best at all times.
Now, Luffy and Zoro, you know, there's a reason that for having a mental role model, I think that they're good mental role models. It's because they don't just embody steps 1 through 7, which are all about ambition and living by your word. They embody step 8, being wholesome, helpful, kind, and understanding. Zoro has a quote: "Everybody has their own circumstances," and he really doesn't judge people when he encounters them, and he understands that are plenty of perspectives when encountering any specific scenario, and that you should keep an open mind to that because everybody has their own past, everybody has their own series of circumstances that led them into a situation or led them to act in a certain way or to do something, which is important because that leads to questioning them and developing an understanding of them and then befriending them.
Sorry, I had to pee real quick. Zoro is also often seen as the kind of, badass, hard, edgy kind of character. But it is typical to see Luffy as, the kind-hearted one. You hardly ever see Luffy not smiling in the show. Hold on. Someone's calling me. Give me a second.
No problem.
All right, I'm back. So I don't know how I want to introduce this. I want to say something like, Zoro is typically seen as hard and edgy and badass, even though he's still so kind. No. I'm just so indecisive about my perfectionism.
Yeah, I can see. Just introduce Luffy's quote however the fuck you want to introduce it, and then just go off there, right? Because I feel like that ties into the step the most.
Yeah.
Like
But I want to continue. I want to continue from what you were saying, which you were saying, Zoro.
I was saying that Zoro understands that everybody has their own circumstance. You know what I mean? That people come from different backgrounds,
Right.
And therefore he's more prone to understanding them or like giving them the benefit of the doubt. Yeah,
I'm good. It's funny because in the show, Zoro is often seen as hard and edgy, but he really is a really nice guy. He cares for his friends and his family, and he truly does not like hurting people unless it's necessary. But the real example of being wholesome, helpful, kind, and understanding is Luffy. There's hardly ever a scene where Luffy isn't smiling. He only stops smiling when it's really time for him to grit and bear. He's always laughing and making jokes, and he never ever is mean to anyone.
He's never malicious, like literally ever.
Literally ever. He is never ever harmful to someone for the sake of being harmful. I can just go into that. Luffy says, being alone hurts worse than pain. Luffy's always surrounding himself with the crewmates that he wants to be with, because what's the point if you're alone? He cherishes his friends that he surrounds himself because they are his family. Without them, he would be alone. And to him, that's worse than any other pain out there.
He also says that if you hurt somebody, or if somebody hurts you, the same red blood will be shed. That's kind of important because it ties into Zoro's quote, we're all human beings, we all face similar struggles, and maybe they're not exactly the same, but we all come from different upbringings. Different people get impacted by the same thing in a different way, right? I could have a girlfriend for 5 years and she could break up with me and I could just shrug it off like it's nothing. But somebody else who grew up with very traditional values could have a girlfriend for 5 years and she breaks up with them and it's like the end of the fucking world, and they're mad depressed for like 3 years or some shit like that. The way people react to certain things isn't identical, and everybody goes through their own shit. But at the end of the day, we're all human. We're just a sack of flesh attached to a skeleton that is somehow moving around through electrical impulses. Aside from that, right, there's not much difference between us. It's just our own experiences.
You gotta keep everyone's circumstances in mind, and Luffy does that the best. Luffy truly does. I mean, at least his character understands the people who are hurting him around him.
Even the villains, he ends up converting a lot of the villains into less villainous characters as the show progresses, because he understands their motives and he kind of calls them out if they're doing something for a negative or a bad motive, or if they're being controlled by somebody else. He kind of calls them out, and his wholesomeness, it kind of infects them, right? No matter how malicious they are, seeing him be so wholesome and caring and like risk his life for his friends, it usually sways them.
Hold on, my headset ran out. I'm plugging it in. It's funny. It feels like we're going over the steps again, but really we're just showing exactly how good examples Luffy and Zoro are to follow these steps.
Yeah.
And speaking of, we have the final step that we've been going over, which is step 9. Be selective with opportunities in life.
Now, Zoro, as I mentioned earlier, always chooses to fight the swordsman. Even if it's inconvenient, even if it seems like a bad idea, even if he's hurt, he's bleeding, he's exhausted, if a swordsman pops up, he'll go and he'll fight the swordsman, because that is part of what will progress him towards his path of becoming the greatest swordsman. And a quote by him is, "When I decided to follow my dream, I had already discarded my life." So in any opportunity, since he already discarded his life when he decided to become the world's greatest swordsman, he has no problem risking his life as he progresses towards his goal. So whenever he encounters a situation, regardless of if it is life-threatening or not, if it's a situation that might push him closer to becoming the world's greatest swordsman, he'll take it. Hence, every single time he encounters a swordsman, he fights them, even if it's completely unnecessary, right? He'll challenge them to a duel, right? That's very important.
They're both Luffy and Zoro are perfect embodiments of this, catching opportunities. They are always willing, if they see something that to them they feel is important or needs to be done, they will risk everything to get there. You can just go over that next time you speak, because that probably you probably have more to say about how important it is to take opportunities for a stepping stone. But I also feel like that's something you've gone over in the actual Step 9 podcast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't need to worry about that until, like, you can use that when you speak. And speaking of risk, Luffy says, if you don't risk your life, you can't create a future, right? If you aren't putting your life on the line for the thing you want the most, you're not gonna create that future with you in it.
I think it's important also to go over, as we did in the previous podcast, the inverse of this, because it says be selective. So choose the things that push you towards your goal, but also avoid the things, or don't get involved with the things that aren't related to your goal. So you see this a lot with Zoro. A lot of the time, he'll let Luffy or Sanji or one of the other crewmates fight somebody if they're not a swordsman, even though he might have been the first to encounter them, simply because he's like, I'm not really that interested because they're not a swordsman. And I mean, he'll still fight non-swordsmen, don't get me wrong. It's just if there's a situation where he might want to conserve his stamina because they're going to encounter some more difficult enemies later, he might pass up the opportunity to one of the other two. Or he might just not engage in the fight whatsoever. Like, he might not instigate a fight. Whereas with swordsmen, he'll purposefully instigate fights. Now, Luffy, he just doesn't get involved in anything that's going to bring him down. If it's not wholesome, it's not going to push him towards his goals. He just doesn't want to get involved in it. Like, people try to, get him involved in like politics or drama, and he's like, yeah, no, I don't really care. So it's important, that both of these characters are very selective in order to progress towards their goals.
Was that Arctic Monkeys?
There's Black Keys.
Oh, Black Keys. And very similar to that, Zoro says, when I decided to follow my dream, I had already discarded my life. I mean, this goes both down the path of live by your word and be selective in opportunities, because it's showing that he truly only makes the choices that are relevant to him and his path. He's saying, my life is on the line here. So when I decided to follow my dream, that means I'm going to follow my dream. I'm going to go down the paths and the roads that I see that are only the opportunities that I need to succeed in my dream.
All right, well, we've covered all the steps that we have gone over so far in
No,
previous
no, no, not like
podcasts.
that. Not like that. That feels like a cut.
I was just going to make closing statements about this.
Yeah, I just didn't like the whole, like, now that we've gone over all the steps. Also, this 8 isn't bold, and it triggers me.
All right, I got it. As we've hopefully delineated in the previous 40-ish minutes of this podcast, I think it's crucial for anybody who wants to embark on the journey of becoming a Busa riding God King and following these steps that they watch One Piece, because although it is not necessary and you can follow all the steps except step 10, which is watch One Piece, without watching One Piece, it is an incredibly helpful guide to show you the importance of each step in various scenarios that you may or may not encounter in your life, and to serve as a constant reminder. If you're watching one episode is 20 minutes, if you're watching one episode a day, let's say, or a couple episodes a week, it's constantly reminding you, it's giving you a visual guide and a mental frame for how you should be living and how you should be thinking through the combination of certain characters in the show. And it also serves kind of as a friend if you're embarking on this path on your own. If you're listening to this podcast and you're not somebody who is closely associated with Adam or I or one of the other previous guests on the podcast, you may not have somebody by your side that's helping you follow these steps, and One Piece can be that like person, quote unquote, for you, right? Because you'll develop a sense of companionship with the characters, since One Piece's character development is absolutely bonkers, right? And you'll get very attached, and that will help you stay on the path.
And you said, the show gives you a mental frame, which is so important. A lot of people, for some reason, don't understand the importance of fantasy and reading and storytelling, because it's through storytelling that a lot of lessons are passed on in life. With the ability to empathize with people, you can empathize with a character and learn their lessons with them. You can understand the things they're going through, and that alone will help you yourself become wiser and more educated.
I mean, that's pretty good. I don't know how do we conclude this now? I'm fucked.
Oh, I got it. So, thank you all for allowing us to try and give you some wisdom and educate you through our own storytelling.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody who listened to today's podcast. Seriously, go watch One Piece. If you're too lazy and you're not Busa and you're not going to be dedicated to watching it, at the very least, watch a couple clips of it on YouTube. Maybe you'll get spoiled, but there's some very good moments of One Piece on YouTube that will elucidate why it's so important and so relevant to the path. Thank you very much for listening.
Fuck you, Craig.
Fuck Craig.